Mark Jenkins woke up early that morning with excitement in his heart. Today was the day he would finally buy the truck he had dreamed about for years. He had saved money for a long time, putting away a little from each paycheck from his small construction business. The calendar on his kitchen wall showed it was Saturday, the perfect day to go to the dealership when he did not have to work. Mark ate a quick breakfast of toast and eggs. He checked his wallet 3 times to make sure he had his credit card and the papers from the bank about his loan. His wife Jane was still sleeping. She had told him to wake her before he left, but Mark decided to let her rest. He knew she was tired from working late shifts at the hospital all week. I will surprise her with the new truck when I get back, Mark thought with a smile. He had talked about getting this truck for so long that Jane probably did not believe he would ever do it. The drive to Riverside Motors took 20 minutes. Mark turned up the radio and sang along to his favorite songs. He felt young again, like a teenager about to get his first car. At 45 years old, Mark had worked hard his whole life. He started his construction business with just a toolbox and a beat-up old van 10 years ago. Now he had 5 workers and many regular customers who trusted his work. When Mark pulled into the dealership parking lot, he saw rows and rows of shiny trucks. Big ones, small ones, black ones, red ones. His heart beat faster as he turned off his old car and stepped out. The morning sun made all the trucks sparkle like they were covered in tiny diamonds. "This is it," Mark whispered to himself. "No more backing out." Inside the dealership, the air smelled like new leather and coffee. A tall man with a big smile walked up to Mark right away. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Riverside Motors. My name is Tom Wilson. How can I help you today?" The man held out his hand for Mark to shake. Mark shook Tom's hand firmly. "Morning. I am here to buy a truck. Something strong enough for construction work, but not too expensive." "You have come to the right place," Tom said, leading Mark toward a glass door that went out to the lot. "We just got some new models in last week. What kind of construction work do you do?" Mark told Tom about his business while they walked past the first row of trucks. He explained how he needed something that could carry heavy tools and materials to job sites. Tom nodded and listened carefully. "I think I know exactly what would work for you," Tom said. He pointed to a red truck near the back of the lot. "That one has a strong engine and lots of space in the back. Plus, it gets good gas mileage for its size." As they walked toward the red truck, Mark noticed an older woman sitting alone on a bench near the service area. She looked sad and kept checking her watch. Something about her face seemed familiar to Mark, but he could not remember where he might have seen her before. Tom was talking about engines and towing capacity, but Mark found himself looking back at the woman. She had gray hair tied in a neat bun and wore glasses with thin gold frames. She must be at least 70 years old, Mark thought. "Would you like to see inside the truck?" Tom asked, pulling Mark's attention back. "Yes, please," Mark said. But as Tom opened the truck door, Mark glanced once more at the woman. She was now wiping what looked like tears from her eyes. Mark did not know then that this sad woman would change his life forever. He did not know that she held the key to a secret he had kept hidden for most of his life. All he knew was that he came to buy a truck, and now he could not stop wondering about the crying woman across the lot. Tom showed Mark around the red truck. It was exactly what Mark needed for his construction business. The truck had a large back space for tools and materials. It looked strong enough to carry heavy things. Mark walked around the truck slowly, touching the shiny paint and looking at the big tires. "This one has a 5-year warranty," Tom said. "And we can add extra features if you want, like a better radio or special covers for the seats." Mark nodded as he looked inside the truck. The seats were made of dark leather and felt soft. The dashboard had many buttons and screens. Mark felt a little nervous looking at all these complicated things. He had never been good with reading small words or understanding new technology. But he did not want Tom to know this. "Can I sit inside?" Mark asked. "Of course," Tom said, opening the driver door wider. "Take your time." Feel how comfortable it is." Mark climbed into the driver's seat. The truck felt high up from the ground. He could see the whole parking lot from the window. His eyes went back to the older woman who was still sitting alone. She now had a tissue in her hand and was talking on her phone. She looked upset. "How much does this truck cost?" Mark asked, trying to focus on why he came here. Tom showed him a paper with numbers on it. "This is the full price, but we have good financing options. With your credit score, you could pay a small amount each month." Mark looked at the paper and pretended to read it carefully. In truth, he was struggling to make sense of all the numbers and words. This was his secret that no one at work knew. Reading was very hard for him. He had learned to hide this problem for many years. "I need to think about it," Mark said, handing the paper back. "Can I walk around a bit more?" "Sure thing," Tom said. "I will get some more information about the truck for you. Take your time." As Tom walked away, Mark decided to get some coffee from the waiting area. He needed a moment to think about the truck and how to handle the paperwork without showing his reading problem. The coffee station was near where the older woman was sitting. Mark poured himself a cup of black coffee. He could hear the woman talking on her phone now. "Yes, I am still waiting for you, David," she said. "The truck is ready to sell. Your father would want someone good to have it." She sounded sad and a little angry. Mark took a sip of his coffee and looked at the woman more closely. There was something very familiar about her face and her voice. He felt like he knew her from somewhere, but he could not remember where. The woman ended her phone call and put her phone in her purse. She noticed Mark looking at her and gave him a small smile. "Are you buying a new truck today?" she asked in a kind voice. "I am thinking about it," Mark answered. "That red one over there looks good." "My husband had a truck similar to that one," she said. "He loved it very much. I am here to sell it now that he is gone." Mark felt sad for her. "I am sorry for your loss," he said. "Thank you," she replied. He was a good man, a high school science teacher for 40 years. Mark nodded and was about to walk away when the woman spoke again. "You look so familiar to me," she said, looking at Mark carefully. "Have we met before?" Mark looked at her face again. Suddenly, a memory came to his mind. Many years ago, in a classroom with bright posters on the walls, a younger version of this woman standing by a chalkboard. "Did you ever teach at Oak Ridge Elementary School?" Mark asked, his heart beating faster. The woman's eyes grew wide. "Yes, I taught 3rd grade there for 30 years before moving to the high school. My name is Helen Wilson." Mark almost dropped his coffee cup. Now he knew exactly who she was. This was Mrs. Wilson, the teacher who knew his biggest secret, the teacher who had tried to help him learn to read when he was 8 years old. Mark stood still as memories from his childhood came rushing back. Mrs. Wilson had been his 3rd grade teacher when he was 8 years old. She was the one who first noticed that he had trouble reading. While other kids in class read out loud with ease, Mark would stumble over words and get confused by letters that seemed to jump around on the page. "Mrs. Wilson," Mark said in a voice that sounded smaller than he wanted. "I was in your class in 1987. Mark Jenkins." Mrs. Wilson looked at him closely. Her eyes moved over his face, as if she was trying to see the small boy he once was inside the grown man standing before her. Then her face lit up with a warm smile. "Little Mark Jenkins," she said. "My goodness, you have grown up. Please, sit down and tell me what you have been doing all these years." Mark sat down on the chair next to her. He felt strange, like he was a child again. Mrs. Wilson had been kind to him when other teachers had called him lazy or stupid. She had stayed after school many days to help him with extra reading practice. "I own a small construction company now," Mark told her. "Jenkins Construction. We build houses and fix up old buildings. I have 5 workers who help me." "That is wonderful," Mrs. Wilson said. "I always knew you were good with your hands. You used to build the best block towers in class." Mark smiled at the memory. "What about you? You said you moved to the high school." Yes, I taught science to teenagers for 15 years after leaving Oak Ridge Elementary. I retired 5 years ago. Her smile faded a little. My husband, Robert, and I had big plans to travel, but he got sick last year. Cancer. He died 2 months ago. I am very sorry, Mark said, meaning it. He remembered that Mrs. Wilson used to talk about her husband sometimes. He was also a teacher. Thank you, she said. Life goes on. I am selling his truck today. My son David was supposed to meet me here to help, but he is running late. Mark looked over at the red truck he had been looking at. I came to buy a truck for my business. I have been saving up for a long time. Mrs. Wilson seemed happy to talk about something else. Tell me about your family, Mark. Did you marry? Do you have children? Yes, I married Jane. She is a nurse. We have 2 daughters, Emma and Sarah. Emma is 14 and Sarah is 11. How lovely, Mrs. Wilson said. And how about your reading? Did you ever overcome those difficulties we worked on? Mark felt his face get warm. This was the question he had been afraid of. His biggest secret. No one in his adult life knew about his reading problems. Not his workers, not his friends, not even his wife and children. He had become very good at hiding it over the years. Before Mark could answer, Tom the salesman came back with a folder full of papers. Mr. Jenkins, I have all the information about the truck ready for you, Tom said. Would you like to go over the details now? Mark felt trapped. He looked at the thick folder in Tom's hands and felt a knot form in his stomach. There would be many forms to read and sign. Usually when he bought something important, he would take the papers home and have Jane help him read them. He would tell her he was too busy or too tired to deal with paperwork. Mrs. Wilson must have seen the worry on his face. She had always been good at knowing when he was struggling. I was just catching up with Mark, she told Tom. He was my student many years ago. Would you mind if I joined you both to look at the truck information? I am curious about what trucks cost these days since I am selling one myself. Mark gave her a grateful look. Maybe with Mrs. Wilson there, he could get through this without revealing his secret to Tom. Tom looked surprised but nodded politely. Of course, Mrs. Wilson. We can all sit together in my office. This way, please. Mark, Mrs. Wilson, and Tom walked to a small office near the back of the dealership. The walls had pictures of trucks and cars on them. There were small models of trucks on the desk. Tom pointed to 2 chairs in front of his desk for Mark and Mrs. Wilson to sit down. So, Mr. Jenkins, here is all the information about the red truck you were looking at, Tom said as he opened the folder and took out several papers. He pushed them across the desk toward Mark. This first page shows the price and all the features. The second page is about the warranty. Then we have the financing options. Mark stared at the papers. The words seemed to swim on the page. Some letters looked backward, and others jumped around. This always happened when he tried to read something new, especially when other people were watching him. His hands felt sweaty. He picked up the first paper and pretended to read it carefully. Mark said, trying to sound like he understood everything. This all looks interesting. Mrs. Wilson gently reached over. May I see those papers too, Mark? My eyes are not what they used to be. Maybe we can look at them together. Mark handed her the papers with relief. Mrs. Wilson put them on the desk between them so they could both see. Then she did something that surprised Mark. She started reading the important parts out loud, but she made it sound like she was just asking questions. So this says the truck costs $45,000. Is that right, Tom? She asked, her finger pointing to the price so Mark could see where it was written. That is correct, Tom said. And I see here it says the warranty lasts for 5 years or 60,000 miles, whichever comes first. She continued, again showing Mark where this information was on the page. Tom nodded. Yes, that is our standard warranty. It covers all major parts of the truck. Mrs. Wilson went through each important part of the papers this way. She was helping Mark understand everything without making it obvious that he could not read well. It was just like when he was 8 years old, and she would help him during class without letting the other kids know he was struggling. Mark felt a mix of shame and gratitude. Here he was, a grown man who owned his own business, and he still needed help reading. But he was also thankful that Mrs. Wilson was there. She remembered his problem and was helping him without making him feel bad about it. "And what about these numbers for the monthly payments?" Mrs. Wilson asked, pointing to a row of numbers at the bottom of one page. Tom explained the different payment options. Mark could handle numbers better than words, so he understood this part more easily. He knew how much money he could spend each month on truck payments. "I think I could do the 5-year payment plan," Mark said, feeling more confident now. "Excellent choice," Tom said, smiling. He was happy that Mark seemed interested in buying the truck. "Let me get the paperwork ready for you to sign." When Tom left the office to get more papers, Mark turned to Mrs. Wilson. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for helping me with that." Mrs. Wilson patted his hand. "You never answered my question, Mark, about your reading. I can see you still have some trouble with it." Mark looked down at his hands. This was the moment he had been avoiding. Should he tell her the truth? That he had never really learned to read properly? That he had been hiding this from everyone for his entire adult life? "Mrs. Wilson, the truth is," Mark began, but then stopped as Tom came back into the office with more papers in his hands. "Here we go," Tom said cheerfully. "Just need your signature on a few places, Mr. Jenkins, and that beautiful red truck can be yours today." Mark looked at all the places he needed to sign. There were small X marks next to empty lines where his name should go. But he knew he would have to read and understand what he was signing first. Mark looked at the stack of papers and felt his heart beat faster. There were so many words to read before he could sign his name. He wished he could just take the papers home and have his wife Jane help him. But Tom and Mrs. Wilson were both waiting and watching. "Actually," Mark said, "I think I need some more time to think about this purchase. Maybe I could come back tomorrow." Tom looked disappointed. "The red truck might not be here tomorrow, Mr. Jenkins. Another customer called about it this morning. If you like it, I would suggest you make a decision today." Mark did not know what to do. He really wanted the truck. He had been saving money for years to buy it. But he also did not want to sign papers he could not read. What if there was something important in those words that could cause problems later? Mrs. Wilson seemed to understand his worry. She turned to Tom and smiled. "Tom, I have a small favor to ask. My eyes are tired today, and there are so many papers here. Would you mind reading the important parts out loud, just to make sure we both understand everything clearly?" Tom looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Wilson. I can do that." For the next 20 minutes, Tom read each paper, explaining what every part meant. Mrs. Wilson asked good questions that made Tom explain even more. Mark listened carefully and felt better about signing his name. He understood what he was agreeing to now. When it was time to sign, Mark took the pen and wrote his name on each line. His handwriting was large and not very neat, but it was clear enough. Tom collected all the papers and smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Jenkins. The truck is yours. I will get the keys for you." When Tom left the office again, Mrs. Wilson turned to Mark with kind eyes. "Mark, I can see that reading is still hard for you. Did you ever get help for your dyslexia?" Mark was shocked. "My what?" "Dyslexia," Mrs. Wilson said. "It is a learning difference that makes it hard to read. Back when you were in my class, we did not know as much about it as we do now. I always thought you had it, but in those days, we did not have good testing for it in our school." Mark sat back in his chair. All his life, he had thought he was just stupid when it came to reading. He had never heard this word before, or if he had not connected it to his problem. "I never got help," Mark said quietly. "I just found ways to hide it. I have people who help with paperwork at my company. My wife helps me at home, but she does not know why. I tell her I am too busy, or that I forgot my glasses. Mrs. Wilson looked sad. Oh, Mark, you have been carrying this secret for so long. It must be very hard. Something broke inside Mark. All the years of hiding, of shame, of feeling less than everyone else came pouring out. No one knows, he whispered. Not my wife, not my children, not my friends. Everyone thinks I am normal. My daughters ask me to read them bedtime stories, and I make up excuses. I have never read a book to them, Mrs. Wilson. Never. I look at the pictures and make up stories to go with them. Tears filled his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. Men who owned construction companies did not cry in truck dealerships. The worst part is, Mark continued, my younger daughter, Sarah, is having trouble in school now, with reading, just like I did. And I cannot even help her because I never fixed my own problem. Mrs. Wilson reached out and put her hand on his arm. Mark, it is never too late to get help. There are programs for adults with dyslexia, and knowing about it could help your daughter too. Mark was about to respond when his phone rang. It was his wife, Jane. He answered it quickly. Hello. Yes, I am still at the dealership. I am buying the truck, he said. As he listened to Jane talk, a new thought began to form in his mind. Mark spoke to his wife, Jane, for a few minutes. She was asking when he would be home and if he had bought the truck yet. Mark told her he was just finishing up at the dealership. I have a surprise for you, he said to Jane. I will tell you when I get home. After saying goodbye, he put his phone back in his pocket. Mrs. Wilson was looking at him with a small smile. Your wife. Mark nodded. Jane is wondering where I am. We were supposed to have lunch together today. Just then, Tom came back with the keys to the red truck. He handed them to Mark with a big smile. Here you are, Mr. Jenkins. Your new truck is ready to go. All the papers are done, and we filled the gas tank for you. Tom held out his hand for Mark to shake. It was a pleasure doing business with you. Mark shook his hand and thanked him. He was now the owner of the red truck he had wanted for so long. But somehow, it did not feel as exciting as he had thought it would. His mind was still on what Mrs. Wilson had said about dyslexia and about getting help. Mrs. Wilson, would you like to see the truck before I drive it away? Mark asked. I would love to, she answered. They walked together out to the parking lot where the red truck was waiting. The sun made the paint shine brightly. It was a beautiful truck, strong and powerful looking. What kind of truck did your husband have? Mark asked as they walked around his new purchase. Robert had a blue truck, very similar to this one but about 10 years older, Mrs. Wilson said. He loved that truck so much, took great care of it too. It still runs perfectly. That is why I am here today, to sell it to someone who will appreciate it. Mark stopped walking and looked at Mrs. Wilson. Is your son coming to help you sell it? Mrs. Wilson sighed. David called again while you were on the phone with your wife. He cannot make it today after all. He lives 2 hours away and his daughter is sick. I understand, of course, but now I have to come back another day to deal with the truck. Mark thought for a moment. Where is your husband's truck now? At my house, Mrs. Wilson said. In the garage. Why do you ask? I would like to see it, Mark said, surprising himself with the words. Maybe instead of this red one, I could buy your husband's truck. If it is still in good condition, it might be perfect for my business. Mrs. Wilson looked surprised but pleased. You would consider buying Robert's truck. It would mean so much to me if it went to someone I know would take care of it. Mark nodded. I would be honored to look at it. And this way, you would not have to come back to the dealership another day. But what about the red truck? You just bought it, Mrs. Wilson said, looking confused. I can talk to Tom about returning it, Mark said. I just signed the papers. They probably have a policy for returns within 24 hours. Mark was not sure why he was doing this. The red truck was exactly what he had wanted. It was new and had all the latest features, but something inside him felt right about this decision. Tom was not happy when Mark told him he wanted to look at another truck before taking the red one home. But when Mark explained the situation with Mrs. Wilson, Tom agreed to hold the red truck until the end of the day. "If you decide not to take it, we will have to charge a small fee for the paperwork," Tom warned. "But I understand wanting to help the lady out." Mark thanked him and turned to Mrs. Wilson. "Would it be okay if I follow you to your house to see the truck now?" Mrs. Wilson smiled, her eyes shining with what looked like tears. "That would be wonderful, Mark. I think you might be surprised by what you find." Mark did not know then that going to Mrs. Wilson's house would change his life in ways he never expected. All he knew was that helping his former teacher felt more important than having a brand new truck. Mark followed Mrs. Wilson in his old car. They drove through town and then into a quiet neighborhood with tall trees and neat houses. Each house had a small garden in front. After about 15 minutes, Mrs. Wilson turned into the driveway of a white house with blue shutters. Mark parked behind her. The house looked well cared for. There were flowers growing along the path to the front door. Mark could tell that someone who lived here loved gardening. "This is a beautiful home," Mark said as he got out of his car. "Thank you," Mrs. Wilson said. "Robert and I lived here for 40 years. We raised our son David here." She looked sad for a moment but then smiled. "The truck is in the garage. This way." She led Mark around the side of the house to a detached garage. Mrs. Wilson took out a key and opened the large garage door. Inside was a blue truck, about 10 years old but looking almost new. It was clean and shiny, without any rust or dents. "This is it," Mrs. Wilson said. "Robert's pride and joy. He washed it every weekend and had it serviced regularly." Mark walked around the truck slowly. It was similar to the red one he had been about to buy, but a bit older. Still, it looked in perfect condition. When he opened the door and looked inside, he was surprised by how clean everything was. The seats were made of dark gray cloth and showed almost no wear. "May I start it?" Mark asked. "Of course," Mrs. Wilson said, handing him the keys. Robert left the keys on his bedside table every night. They have been there since. She did not finish her sentence. Mark got into the truck and put the key in. The engine started right away with a strong, healthy sound. The gas tank was full, and all the lights on the dashboard worked. Mark looked at the odometer. The truck had been driven 85,000 miles, which was not much for a 10-year-old vehicle. "The engine sounds great," Mark said when he turned off the truck. "Your husband really did take good care of it." "He did," Mrs. Wilson agreed. "Would you like to take it for a drive?" Mark nodded, and they both got into the truck. He drove around the neighborhood and then on the highway for a few miles. The truck handled well and had good power. It would be perfect for his construction business. When they returned to Mrs. Wilson's house, Mark had made up his mind. "I would like to buy this truck, Mrs. Wilson. How much are you asking for it?" Mrs. Wilson told him a price that was much less than the red truck at the dealership. The blue truck was older but in such good condition that it was still a very good deal. "That sounds fair," Mark said. "I will need to go to the bank to get the money. Can I come back this afternoon?" "Of course," Mrs. Wilson said. "Would you like some lunch first? I made chicken salad this morning." Mark remembered he was supposed to have lunch with Jane. He checked his watch and saw it was already past noon. "Thank you for the offer, but I should call my wife first. I promised to have lunch with her today." "Bring her here," Mrs. Wilson suggested. "I would love to meet her, and I have plenty of food." Mark was surprised by the invitation but called Jane. He explained that he had met his old teacher and was considering buying her late husband's truck instead of the new one. Jane was curious and agreed to come to Mrs. Wilson's house for lunch. While they waited for Jane to arrive, Mrs. Wilson showed Mark into her house. The inside was as neat as the outside, with comfortable furniture and bookshelves along one wall. Mark noticed there were many books, which made him feel a bit uncomfortable. He had always avoided places with lots of books. "Would you like some tea while we wait?" Mrs. Wilson asked. "Yes, thank you," Mark said, sitting down on a chair in the living room. Mrs. Wilson went to the kitchen, and Mark looked around the room. On a small table near his chair, he saw a stack of books. The top one caught his eye. It had a simple title that even he could read: Living with Dyslexia. Mark picked up the book carefully, as if it might have answers he had been looking for his whole life. When Mrs. Wilson came back with the tea, she saw him holding the book. Mrs. Wilson set the tea down on the table and sat in the chair across from Mark. "That was Robert's book," she said quietly. "He had dyslexia too." Mark looked up in surprise. "Your husband had dyslexia, but he was a teacher." "Yes, a science teacher." Mrs. Wilson nodded. "Robert struggled with reading his whole life, but he was brilliant with numbers and scientific concepts. He found ways to work around his reading difficulties." Mark could not believe what he was hearing. He had always thought people with reading problems could not be successful or smart. Yet here was Mrs. Wilson telling him that her husband had been a respected teacher for 40 years while having the same problem Mark had. "How did he do it?" Mark asked. "How did he teach if reading was hard for him?" "He got help when he was in college," Mrs. Wilson explained. "There were special programs and tools. He learned strategies to cope with his dyslexia, and he was open about it with his students. He even became a mentor for students who had similar learning differences." Mark shook his head in wonder. "I never knew there were other people like me. I always thought I was just—" He stopped, not wanting to say the word. "Stupid," Mrs. Wilson finished for him. "That is what so many people with dyslexia think about themselves. But it is not true, Mark. Dyslexia has nothing to do with intelligence. Many very smart, successful people have dyslexia." Robert collected books about it. She pointed to the bookshelf. "A whole section is dedicated to learning differences." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. It was Jane, arriving for lunch. Mark introduced his wife to Mrs. Wilson. Jane was a pretty woman with short brown hair and kind eyes. She hugged Mrs. Wilson warmly. "Mark told me you were his third-grade teacher," Jane said. "It is so nice to meet you." "The pleasure is all mine," Mrs. Wilson replied. "Mark was a special student. I always remembered him." They went to the kitchen for lunch. Mrs. Wilson had set the table with nice plates and glasses. The chicken salad was served with fresh bread and fruit on the side. As they ate, Mrs. Wilson told Jane stories about Mark as a child. Jane laughed at the stories, clearly enjoying hearing about her husband's childhood. "He was always so good at building things," Mrs. Wilson said. "Once, he made a model of the solar system that was so detailed the principal put it in a display case in the school hallway." Jane nodded proudly. "He still has amazing skills with his hands. You should see the dollhouse he built for our daughters. It has tiny working lights and real little curtains." Mark felt his face grow warm at the praise. He was not used to people talking about him this way, especially not about his school days. Those memories were mostly painful for him. As they finished lunch, Mrs. Wilson brought out a photo album. "I kept pictures of all my classes," she explained, opening the book to a page from 1987. "Here is our class picture that year." Jane leaned in excitedly. "Which one is Mark?" Mrs. Wilson pointed to a small boy with messy hair standing in the back row. He was not smiling in the picture. Mark remembered that day. The photographer had asked them to read a sign, and he could not do it. He had felt stupid and angry. "He looks so serious," Jane said, touching the photo gently. "School was not always easy for Mark," Mrs. Wilson said, glancing at him. There was a question in her eyes, asking if she could say more. Mark felt something shift inside him. He had kept his secret for so long, hiding his shame from everyone. But sitting here in Mrs. Wilson's kitchen, seeing the book about dyslexia on the table, hearing about her husband, who had the same problem but lived a successful life, Mark felt ready to let go of his secret. "Jane," he said, his voice slightly shaky, "there is something I need to tell you, something I have never told anyone." He took a deep breath. "I have trouble reading. I always have, since I was a child. Mrs. Wilson tried to help me back then, but I never really learned. I have been hiding it my whole life." Jane looked surprised, then confused. "What do you mean? You read the newspaper every morning." Mark shook his head. "I look at the pictures and pretend. I have been pretending for years. When you ask me to read letters or emails or instructions, I make excuses so you will read them to me instead. I can read a little bit, simple words and signs, but anything complicated is just jumbled letters to me." Jane stared at Mark with wide eyes. "All these years? You have been hiding this all these years?" Her voice was not angry, just shocked. Mark nodded, looking down at his hands. "I was ashamed. I did not want you to think I was stupid." "Oh, Mark." Jane reached across the table and took his hands in hers. "I would never think that. Never. You are one of the smartest men I know. You built a successful business from nothing. You can look at a broken thing and know exactly how to fix it. That is not stupid." Mrs. Wilson smiled at them both. "That is exactly what I tried to tell Mark when he was 8 years old. Intelligence comes in many forms. Some people are good with words, others with numbers, and others with their hands." "But what about Sarah?" Mark asked, looking at his wife. "She is having the same problems in school that I had. She might have dyslexia too, and I have not been able to help her because of my own shame." Jane squeezed his hands. "Now you can help her. You can show her that having trouble with reading does not mean she cannot be successful and happy. You are living proof of that." Mark had not thought of it that way before. He had been so focused on hiding his problem that he had not considered how this experience might actually help his daughter. "Mrs. Wilson," Mark said, "your husband had books about dyslexia. Do you think I could borrow one? I want to learn more about it. For Sarah and for myself." "Of course," Mrs. Wilson said. "In fact, I want you to have Robert's whole collection. He would have wanted them to go to someone who could really use them." Mark felt tears in his eyes. "Thank you. For everything. For helping me today and for trying to help me all those years ago." They finished lunch, and Mrs. Wilson packed up several books about dyslexia for Mark to take home. Then they went back outside to look at the blue truck one more time. "It really is perfect for my business," Mark said, walking around it again. "And knowing it belonged to someone who faced the same challenges I have, someone who did not let those challenges stop him, that makes it even more special." Mark went to the bank and returned with the money to buy the truck. Mrs. Wilson gave him all the papers for it, which Jane helped him understand. They hugged goodbye, with Mrs. Wilson making Mark promise to come back and tell her how things were going with his reading journey. As Mark drove his new blue truck home, with Jane following in his old car, he felt lighter than he had in years. His secret was out, at least to his wife, and she still loved and respected him. He had books that might help him and his daughter, and he had a truck that reminded him that people with dyslexia could do great things. At home, his daughters Emma and Sarah ran out to see the new truck. They climbed inside, exploring every part of it with excitement. "Daddy, whose truck was this before?" Sarah asked, touching the steering wheel. "It belonged to a very special teacher," Mark said. "A man who had trouble reading, just like you and me, but who still did amazing things with his life." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "You have trouble reading too, Daddy?" Mark nodded, pulling his younger daughter into a hug. "Yes, I do. And tonight, maybe we can look at some books together. There is a special name for what makes reading hard for us. It is called dyslexia, and I have some books that might help us understand it better. Can we read them together?" Sarah asked hopefully. "Yes," Mark said, feeling the new kind of confidence. "We can read them together. And maybe we can get help together too. There are people who know how to teach people like us." That night, Mark sat with Sarah on the couch. The book about dyslexia was open on his lap. The words were still difficult for him, but for the first time in his life, he did not feel ashamed to struggle with them. Jane sat nearby, ready to help if needed, but letting Mark try first. Dyslexia. Mark read slowly, his finger moving under the word. A different way of learning. Sarah smiled up at him. Just like us, right, Daddy? Mark hugged his daughter close. Just like us. And that is okay. More than okay. It is just who we are. Outside the window, the blue truck sat in the driveway. To anyone else, it might have looked like just a truck, but to Mark, it was so much more. It was the truck that had led him to face his biggest secret and begin a new chapter in his life. All because he went to buy a truck and met a customer whose words changed everything.